Mark your calendars. We'll soon learn how much time a federal judge will give Sean Diddy Combs after he was convicted this summer on 2 prostitution-related charges. His high-powered defense attorneys are urging for release as they got some famous names to write letters of support for the Bad Boy Records founder. We're breaking down who's still on Diddy's side even after he was acquitted on the more serious charges of racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking.
The courtroom was drenched in silence, but it wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the kind that squeezes the air from the room, leaving everyone breathless. It was the kind of silence that carried weight heavy enough to crush a man's soul. Every eye in the room was locked on the figure sitting at the center of it all.
Diddy's lawyers wrote in a recent court filing their client has been punished enough, but will the judge agree next week when he officially sentences the mogul? Or will that even matter, as there still could be a possibility he could get a new trial? It's officially been more than a year since Sean Diddy Combs has been locked up in a federal detention center in Brooklyn, New York. Ahead of his trial, his lawyers pushed for pre-trial release, and that was denied after every request, even after he was only convicted on the Mann Act charges or transportation to engage in prostitution, as Diddy's lawyers chalk up those charges to an alternative or swingers lifestyle. But the judge still kept the mogul behind bars pending the outcome of his sentencing. In his ruling, Judge Arun Subramanian wrote, "While Combs may contend at sentencing that this evidence should be discounted and that what happened was nothing more than a case of willing swingers utilizing the voluntary services of escorts for their mutual pleasure, the government takes the opposite view, that Cassie Ventura and Jane were beaten, coerced, threatened, lied to, and victimized by Combs as a part of their participation in these events." Diddy's federal trial had bombshell testimony seemingly every single day of trial. However, he was still acquitted on 3 of his 5 federal charges. However, that didn't mean his Hollywood peers publicly welcomed him back with open arms. There are some, though, who are supporting him ahead of his sentencing, like his former girlfriend, Caresha Brownlee, better known as Young Miami. She wrote in part, quote, "My name is Caresha Brownlee. I'm a mother, daughter, sister, and a hip-hop artist who has spent many years in the public eye. I want to be clear that I cannot speak on or defend anything that may have happened before I met Sean Combs. I do not condone any wrongdoing. I can only speak from my personal experience and the man I've come to know over the past 4 years. One of my most meaningful memories was when he took me to my first Met Gala. It wasn't just about the event, it was about what it represented. Sean has always made it a priority to open doors for Black people to make it sure we are seen, heard, and valued in spaces where we've historically been excluded. That night reminded me that we belong in every room, at every table, and in every conversation. He's constantly encouraged me and so many others to dream bigger, walk in confidence, and never shrink who we are to make others comfortable. I've also witnessed him doing real inner work. He made the choice to check himself into anger management, start therapy, and commit to physical healing through therapy. That takes strength, humility, and self-awareness. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he wanted to grow and to become a better person. In my personal experience, Sean is not a danger or threat to the community. He is a man of God, someone who uplifts, supports, and inspires those around him to be better mentally, physically, and spiritually. But more than anything, he's a father, and his kids are the ones who look up to him the most. They need him. His presence, love, and guidance matter deeply in their lives. I truly believe that he belongs at home with his family, the people who mean the most to him, and who continue to be his greatest source of purpose and strength. Judge, that's a good man. Music producer Dallas Austin wrote in part, "As I have become to know Sean over the years, he has become like a brother to me. I have always seen him as a man of unwavering dedication to his loved ones, his family, especially his mom and children. He is a devoted father whose family always comes first, and the balance he maintains between his personal and professional life is both inspiring and admirable." Former Love and Hip Hop star and music producer Stephen Jordan, aka Stevie J, wrote in part, "Being in this entertainment business for 30 years and being friends with Sean, we've both endured personal challenges with anger and drugs, as I've been going to therapy and taking all the necessary precautions never to look back at addiction again. I'm proud of Sean. I've read in the press that he's clean and sober and also taking anger management therapy to become a better person, because we all fall short as long as we correct ourselves and never revert to our old ways." Now that's just scratching the surface. The defense submitted more than 65 letters of support in favor of Combs to the judge. There are also letters from each of his children, with the exception of his daughter, who's a toddler.
And that figure was Diddy. No lights, no stage, no entourage, no shield of money or influence. just a man stripped of every layer he had spent decades building. A man trembling on the edge of collapse, begging in front of the world for a mercy he knew might never come. The atmosphere was suffocating. The walls themselves seemed to close in as Diddy stood. His hands shook his chest, rose and fell unevenly. His lips quivered as though every word he was about to speak would cost him more than he could bear. This wasn't swagger. This wasn't power. This wasn't the bravado of the mogul who once ruled music and culture with an iron grip. This was desperation. Raw, unfiltered desperation. The courtroom waited, leaning in, almost holding its collective breath as Diddy began to plead for his release. His voice cracked from the first syllable. His words came out rough, heavy, trembling with the weight of fear. He spoke of his reality inside those prison walls, and every sentence peeled back the illusion further.
Here and should play no role at sentencing. Now, his attorneys argue Diddy and his girlfriends, specifically Cassie and Jane Doe, were all adults when they participated in the Wild King nights or hotel nights or freak-offs. The defense says Combs had serious relationships with those women and were in consensual sexual experiences with adult third parties. And they argue he didn't profit in any way of these hotel nights or freak-offs like a Mann Act defendant typically would. Throughout his trial, drugs were brought up ad nauseum, and this recent court filing was no exception. Diddy's lawyers claim drugs and a high-profile celebrity lifestyle played a role in his conduct. They wrote, without minimizing Mr. Combs' conduct, this is in many ways a sex, drugs, and rock and roll story. Mr. Combs had severe substance abuse problems throughout the entirety of the offense conduct and participated in a high-octane celebrity lifestyle. So did Miss Ventura, independently and not because of Mr. Combs. As for Jane, she willingly took ecstasy and other drugs with Mr. Combs, which became a part of their relationship. Now, during trial, the defense seemingly implied what happened in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel was due to a bad batch of drugs. But in this new filing, Diddy's defense team says that the Intercontinental Hotel beating of Cassie was a rare time where Combs committed acts of violence during his relationship with Cassie. This despite Cassie herself testifying she couldn't recall how many beatings there were because there were so many. In this recent filing, though, the defense wrote, the violence was not entirely one-sided. However, Ms. Ventura testified there were times when she initiated physical fights with Mr. Combs. On one occasion, for example, she punched Mr. Combs in the face. Mr. Combs, for his part, is the first to exclaim that these acts of domestic violence against Ms. Ventura are inexcusable. But the notion that the violence or coercion had a nexus to freak-offs is not true, as the jury clearly found. Now, part of the reason the judge kept him behind bars pending sentencing was because he admitted to being physically violent with Jane as recently as June of 2024, 3 months before his arrest. Jane testified she started that physical altercation and admitted to throwing things at him, calling him a pedophile and a monster after punching him in the head. The defense wrote, by that point, Mr. Combs was intoxicated as he had consumed multiple glasses of champagne and multiple shots of tequila. Again, Mr. Combs knows that partaking in any type of physical violence with a woman is inexcusable, but the jury rejected the argument that the violence caused Jane to participate in a hotel night. Throughout the court filing, the mogul's defense team argues his conviction isn't like other Mann Act cases where the DOJ, for example, limits the prosecutions to cases involving sex trafficking minors or defendants who engage in commercial prostitution enterprises as panderers or call girl operations. They wrote, quote, in other words, only 1% of Mann Act cases we identified involved so-called buyers or Johns. That number alone speaks volumes and corroborates the conclusion that the DOJ does not seek to incarcerate Mann Act defendants who merely purchase prostitution services. During the trial, we learned through testimony what some of the male escorts or entertainers that were hired do during these freak-offs or hotel nights, and that was through the testimony of Daniel Phillips and Sheree Hayes, aka The Punisher. Diddy's defense argued this is the only case they've identified where prosecutors claim professional consenting adult males were Mann Act victims. Writing, the government now claims that the male escorts were Mr. Combs' victims, but this is apparently the only case in Mann Act history where the government has argued that consenting professional adult male escorts or entertainers who made thousands of dollars were victims. The Mann Act did not originally treat men as victims, and Congress never anticipated such an application of the statute. They argue the time he served has been punishment enough, especially serving time at MDC Brooklyn. His team argued the mogul is routinely subjected to violence, both directed at him and at others. They point one example from less than 2 weeks ago, writing, on September 12th, for example, defense counsel was in the middle of a legal video call with Mr. Combs, which was summarily ended at.
He described the threats, the stares, the sense that at any moment something terrible could happen. He spoke of the violence of the attack that had already shaken him, and of the night spent awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding with fear of what tomorrow might bring. He said the walls were closing in, that every step he took inside that place was shadowed by danger. He said his life was not just at risk. It was hanging by a thread, and that thread was fraying. It wasn't just words. It was a man unraveling in real time. His hands trembled so violently that even the chains around his wrists rattled loud enough for the gallery to hear his knees wavered, as though they might give out at any moment. His face that once wore the smile of arrogance now carried tears raw and unhidden. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled the world outside devoured every second of his collapse. But none of it stopped him from speaking.
2 p.m. because of a stabbing that locked the facility down for the next several days. They write living conditions at MDC remain inhumane, lockdowns remain common, and other conditions are similarly horrible. There are 10 different examples listed of what Diddy's life truly has been like behind bars, a far cry from his life of luxury, including constant suicide watch. This means that every 10 hours, Mr. Combs must present his identification card to the guards to show that he is alive and well. Limited access to clean water. Mr. Combs often heats his water to have clean water to drink without getting sick. Sleeping in a dorm-style room within 2 feet from other inmates with the bathroom in the same room with no door. Mr. Combs has not breathed fresh air in nearly 13 months or felt sunlight on his skin. Often walking with a limp due to a painful knee injury that requires surgery that he has not received in federal custody. Lack of access to healthy or edible food, which is essential to pre-diabetics. The food that Mr. Combs has survived on includes expired processed pork, chicken, and beef, which on any given day can contain maggots. Lack of physical exercise with weights or any proper equipment. No physical therapy for his several shoulder and knee injuries. No functioning washing machines/dryers. And extreme temperatures, freezing cold or burning hot. Now, after his trial and the dozens of lawsuits he faces, his lawyers argue that his legacy has been destroyed, stating, due to adverse publicity and the allegations which the jury rejected, he faces nearly 100 lawsuits, most of which have been filed by individuals he has never met before, all of which contain made-up claims by individuals seeking to profit from Mr. Combs' downfall. Unfortunately, these lawsuits have involved his family, with his 84-year-old mother being sued in several states by individuals and his sons also being sued alongside Mr. Combs. They go on to write, as bad as life is inside of MDC, Mr. Combs has suffered countless other losses. Since his incarceration and conviction on the Mann Act, these and other collateral consequences to his life have been personally devastating. He has been separated from his family, has mounting legal bills from the indictment and defending lawsuits that were the direct result of the United States Attorney Damian Williams' prejudicial press conference announcing this case, and has lived in MDC for over a year, despite having every intention on fighting this case from day one. His defense attorneys cite other instances where his life has been systematically dismantled. For example, after Cassie's lawsuit and the lawsuits after, his companies were unable to operate as they once were, and he had to let go of over 1,000 employees. Some employees, according to the document, were unable to get new employment because of their past association with the mogul. His federal case has also had devastating consequences for his children. They were canceled and lost business opportunities. The family's Hulu show was canceled after Cassie's lawsuit. He was removed from the boards of 3 charter schools he created. He was stripped of his honorary doctorate degree from Howard University. He was forced to return the key to the city of New York, and he had to step down from his TV network Revolt, which according to the filing was one of 2 black TV networks in the United States. So in all, the defense is hoping the judge sentences him to a 14-month sentence, meaning if the judge sides with him, it's likely he could be out of jail before the holidays. As of this recording, though, prosecutors haven't submitted their recommendations for his sentencing, but they've previously said that he has an extreme history of violence and that the attempts to minimize his conduct show he's still very dangerous. So that was a lot, right? A lot of legalese, a lot of pages to go through. So let's break it down further with none other than criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson Ferrer. Safa, always great to see you, and thanks so much for joining me. Let's take a little step back. It's almost sentencing time for Diddy. He needs support. The defense sent a bunch of letters, some including from Young Miami, Dallas Austin, Stevie J, the mothers of his daughters Love and Chance, his mom, his sister, all of his kids minus the youngest one. But what did you make of the letters of support?
I'm not surprised to see letters of support here. That's actually pretty typical as sentencing is about to commence, or shortly, at least a week or two before the sentencing commences. And a lot of times, defendants and clients will submit letters.
He begged the judge to see him not as the mogul, not as the man once untouchable, but as a human being trapped in a nightmare, begging to be freed before the nightmare consumed him completely. The gallery was split. Some gasped at the sight. Some whispered that it was nothing more than performance, that the man who had lived a life of manipulation was now trying to manipulate the courtroom. Others, however, saw the trembling hands, the broken voice, and the fear in his eyes, and recognized a man truly shattered by the reality he was facing. But regardless of opinion, every single person in that room knew they were witnessing history. They were witnessing the destruction of a man who once called himself untouchable, reduced to begging for survival in front of strangers. His lawyers jumped in their tones frantic, their words sharp. They piled papers onto the desk motions for emergency release filings stacked one after another. They said his life was at risk every second he spent behind those
That are on behalf of family members and loved ones, giving a clearer picture to the judge as to who this person is generally, or who this person is and what they mean to their family and their loved ones. And that's a part of what we call a mitigation or sentencing memorandum that goes to the court in order to get a lesser sentence, or to give the judge an idea of, this is a good guy, mistakes happen or bad things happen, but he's been reformed, rehabilitated, and we as his family need him back.
And are you surprised more famous faces didn't come front and center to possibly also voice their support in favor of Diddy? I was surprised to only kind of see really the three standout names being Dallas Austin, Young Miami, and Stevie J, at least to me. But are you surprised other famous faces didn't also voice their support through letters, like maybe Ye, who attended the court that one day?
I'm actually not too surprised that we haven't heard more from some of the other celebrities, because I think that anybody with a pretty sound PR team is going to tell them to stay far away from this and to not give any opinions of it. I am kind of surprised that we haven't heard anything from Ye, but that's his prerogative. Of course, he has shown his support throughout the trial, and anybody who is willing and wants to support Mr. Combs through the sentencing phase and provide a memorandum or a letter, then they're able to do that. But I think, considering what the defense has provided to the court, there have been significant amounts of letters and things of that nature that the judge can go off of to get another side of Mr. Combs, maybe different from what the judge has for that trial.
Do you think any of the letters kind of swayed maybe even your opinion in terms of what we heard at trial versus kind of the aftermath, even, before the trial began, that made you change your opinion in any type of way? I kind of felt like everything just felt kind of repetitive a little bit.
I think the most captivating letter that I got a chance to view was his mother's, and she makes a very good point. She's an 85-year-old woman, or in her mid-80s. She doesn't know how much time she has left on this earth. And so one of the things that I think is important, and what really spoke to me and would probably speak to the judge, is wanting the ability to spend the end of her life with her, granting them the ability to reconcile their relationship outside of him being incarcerated, also granting the ability for the family to essentially be reunited and to satisfy this mother's wishes of having her son reunited with his children, her grandchildren, so that they can heal, move forward, and spend the rest of her life, or her last years, together.
And, Janice was a fixture at every single day at trial. I don't think there was a day she missed. She was there every single day inside that courtroom, making sure that her son had support during especially those hard parts of the testimony and hard parts of the trial. But what's your reaction to the defense asking for 14 months? Would that essentially mean, if the judge goes in favor of the defense, is it possible that Diddy could walk out of that courthouse next week?
Absolutely. That is exactly the case. And that's what the defense is essentially going for, is that 14-month sentence, which I'm not exactly sure of the time calculation that he has spent incarcerated. But looking for essentially time served here so that he can go back home to his family. And as a part of the sentencing memorandum, and there are sentencing factors that the judge can consider in his determination, there's the guideline range on which Mr. Combs will fall. I think that the defense has essentially argued or will argue that 14 months is within the guideline range. I expect that the prosecution is going to argue that there's a high
Walls. They argued that the system had a duty not just to punish, but to protect. They said leaving him there was cruel, unusual, and reckless. They begged alongside him, painting a picture of a man who would not survive long enough to serve the sentence handed to him. The prosecution, however, stood stiff. Cold, unshaken, their words were measured cutting. They argued that prison was not supposed to be safe, that countless others faced the same realities, that Diddy was not special, not above the rules. They reminded the court of the severity of his crimes, the decades of whispers, the countless victims. They said he had lived in luxury long enough, and that fear was not a reason to grant him freedom. Their tone was merciless, each word slicing away at the defense's desperate pleas. But even their cutting words could not fully erase the image of Diddy, trembling, broken, humiliated before the judge. The judge
Using other inmates, that was a direct affront to that judge. That was remember, we had all those attempts at bail that were denied at the very beginning of the case, one after another after another. This judge, and it's the same judge who's going to sentence him, denied that over and over again. And you and I, again, in another conversation we had on your show, we both said he is screwed now, that he's got no chance because he's violating the rules of the court while in jail. So if he's disobeying the rules of the jail and the directive of the court while he's in custody, how can he be expected to actually follow the terms of a bail agreement when he's out of custody?
Right, right.
And I think that chicken is coming home to roost again. I mean, I think that's what happened yesterday afternoon. That any judge who has a criminal defendant who behaves like that, that is an affront to the court itself. It's disrespectful to the court. And it's almost like he couldn't get out of his own way there at the beginning. But he had an excellent defense team.
He does. He does. So assuming for a moment, whenever the sentencing hearing happens, right? Let's say it happens in a month from now. Let's say it has October 3rd. The question is, what's his sentence? As we mentioned, the prosecution in a filing from yesterday talked about the guidelines range being 51 to 63 months. Now, this is before a pre-sentencing investigation and report. Now, the defense, right, they want 21 months. He's already served almost 10. Talk to us about what you're thinking here, because there is no minimum. The maximum's 10. If the judge were to combine it together, like you said, 20 years, feels highly unlikely that would happen. As we're talking, what is a pre-sentencing report investigation? How would it affect this? What do you think the judge is going to do? There's so many different factors to consider here, and it's not like a murder case when it's like, okay, we know what's going to happen. It's like life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a given. There's room here. What do you think the judge is going to do?
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that federal judges traditionally really adhere to. They tend to put a lot of weight on those, far more than they do in state court. The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability, most of the time, to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't impact their professional recommendation. It's really, I think we're going to see what they thought of the case. Did they think he got away with something horrific here? Did they think that he was getting railroaded from the beginning? I think that may reflect in the recommendation to the court. But of course, we don't know what that is yet. I don't know. If I'm his defense lawyer, I don't know if I am pressing the gas on that, trying to make this thing go faster. I mean, it's coming up. It's coming up soon enough anyway. I would want to give them the time and not press them, because you don't want a probation officer or anybody in the federal system to feel like they're being rushed.
Right.
Because I think it's very easy to just go,
Yeah.
okay, screw it, the guy should stay in.
The prosecution made the
those
point
guys just
yesterday. They said the point, like, we're not ready to give a really sentencing recommendation. We haven't gotten the report. There's people say, well, maybe he'll get time served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him, even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence.
Judge listened. His face still, his body unmoved, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. He knew this was no ordinary case. He knew the world was watching. He knew the cameras would replay every second again and again, dissecting every twitch, every expression, every word. The gavel in his hand carried more weight than ever before, and with every passing second, Diddy seemed to crumble further, knowing that his future lay in that single man's hands. Diddy lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking as his tears finally broke through. His body was no longer a symbol of control or strength. It was the body of a man defeated. He whispered words so faint that only those closest could hear, words of desperation, words of pleading. His lawyers rubbed his back, trying to hold him together, but nothing could stop the collapse. He was begging not just for release, he was begging for his life, for the chance to breathe without fear, for the chance to escape the nightmare that had swallowed him whole. The courtroom was chaos. Whispers, flying gasps, echoing pens, scratching reporters scrambling to capture every detail. The cameras zoomed tighter, capturing the tears, the trembling, the collapse of a man who once seemed unbreakable. The energy was suffocating, heavy, pressing down on every chest, and in the middle of it all, Diddy sat consumed by despair. Outside, the world reacted. Social media lit up headlines, screamed, talk shows debated. Some called it justice. Some called it tragedy. Some called it karma. Some called it cruelty. But all agreed on one thing. The image of Diddy broken, begging, trembling before the judge would be etched in memory forever. This was not the story of an untouchable mogul anymore. This was the story of a man who had built an empire only to have it stripped away, leaving him a prisoner of the very reality he had once believed he could outrun. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not asking for sympathy. He was asking for survival. The mogul who had lived in mansions, who had flown in jets, who had thrown parties that defined an era, now begged for the chance to live through another day inside those walls. His voice shook. His words cracked, but his message was clear. He could not survive in that place, and every second he stayed there was another second closer to the end. And as the gavel slammed for silence, as the lawyers clashed, as the cameras captured every second, the truth became undeniable. Diddy was no longer the man he had been. He was no longer the mogul, the icon, the king. He was a man destroyed by reality, stripped of power, stripped of wealth, stripped of pride, reduced to tears, reduced to trembling, reduced to begging in front of the world. The gallery was stunned. Reporters scribbled furiously. The cameras zoomed in on every expression, every tear, every desperate glance he threw toward the judge. Some in the audience gasped. Others shook their heads, but all of them were witnessing something they never expected to see. Diddy, the man who once ruled the culture, the man who once proclaimed himself untouchable, was begging for his freedom in a way that revealed just how broken he had become. The prosecution stood stiff, unsympathetic, arguing that fear and hardship were the very reality of prison life and not a reason for special treatment. But even as they spoke, the image of Diddy trembling before the court overshadowed their words. His lawyers pressed hard, filing motions, demanding immediate release, their tones urgent and frantic. They argued that keeping him inside was cruel, that the environment was unsafe, that his life itself was at risk. But the judge remained stone-faced, listening, weighing every word. The power Diddy once wielded over music, over fashion, over culture, it meant nothing here. The only power that mattered was the gavel in the judge's hand. And that truth hit Diddy harder than anything else. This was not just a fall from grace. This was not just a scandal. This was obliteration. This was the breaking of a man before the eyes of millions. And whether the judge granted him mercy or not, the damage was already done. The empire was gone. The legacy was tainted. The image of power was shattered. The only thing left was a man on his knees, pleading for survival as the walls of justice closed in tighter and tighter. That image, that sound, that trembling voice will haunt forever. It was the sound of a man begging not as a mogul, not as a celebrity, but as a human being stripped bare by reality. It was the sound of the end.